Two hungry children, Sam and Ellie, were kept under the control of a drifter who treated their need for food as leverage. The man's smug grip on them and his cold dismissal of Zach Harper's offer to help made the injustice burn even hotter. But Zach had a plan and an ally that would turn the night into the moment everything changed. And just wait until you hear how this standoff ended and why justice at last stood tall on that dusty plain. The desert wind moved like a restless animal, tugging at the low scrub and carrying fine threads of sand that hissed against weathered fence posts. The late afternoon sun hung low, turning the horizon into a blinding ribbon of gold. Out here, sound traveled strange, sometimes vanishing into the empty sky, sometimes arriving sharp and close, as if whispered directly into the ear. Zach Harper had been walking the fence line, his hat pulled low, his boots sinking into dry, cracked soil. That's when he heard it. Not the groan of wood or the cry of a hawk. This was softer, human, fragile. He stopped, turned, and saw the boy. He couldn't have been more than 10, though his frame was so slight it made him seem younger. His shirt was no better than a rag, frayed at the collar, sleeves too short, fabric so thin the sunlight nearly passed through it. His hair clung to his forehead in dusty strands, and when he lifted his eyes, they carried the dull glaze of someone too long without comfort. "Sir," the boy's voice cracked halfway through the word. He swallowed, tried again. "We haven't eaten in 2 days." The words didn't hang in the air. They sank heavy as a stone in a dry well. Zach's jaw set hard. He shifted his gaze, and behind the boy he caught sight of a girl, taller, maybe 12 or 13. Her posture tight, her chin lifted in a way that didn't match the tremor in her hands. She stood as if daring the wind to move her, but her eyes, they told the truth. Fear, exhaustion, a guarded plea she didn't want to speak out loud. Then Zach's eyes went to the third figure. A man lingered a step off to the side, leaning just enough to make his presence felt. His hat had once been respectable, but the crown was misshapen, the brim uneven and frayed. His grin was thin and humorless, curling more on one side, and his hand rested heavy on each child's shoulder. Not the weight of a guardian. It was the grip of a man who didn't want what he considered his to wander. "They yours?" Zach asked, his tone flat, but carrying the steel of a man who already knew the answer. The man's grin deepened, showing teeth stained by years of hard living. "Ours," he said, his voice slow and deliberate, as if enjoying the sound of it. "They work for food. But lately," his grip tightened fractionally, "seems they've gone soft. Maybe you can remind them how folks survive out here." The words cut sharper than barbed wire. Zach felt something stir deep inside, a slow heat rising from his gut to his chest. It wasn't the flash-fire anger of a quick insult. It was the kind of burn that came from recognizing something he'd seen before. Too many times before. He knew this type. Men who wandered from one dried-up town to the next, not looking for work but for opportunity, the kind that preyed on hunger, on loneliness, on desperation. Out here, the land could be cruel, but men like this, they chose to be worse. The wind carried a swirl of dust between them, and for a moment, nobody spoke. The boy lowered his eyes. The girl stayed rigid, as if any movement might make the situation worse. And Zach didn't move either. He simply stood there, hat shadowing his face, letting the silence stretch until it was taut as a fence wire about to snap. Zach pushed the door open, holding it with one hand as he stepped aside. "Come on in," he said in a low, steady voice. "You can rest your feet a while." They crossed the threshold cautiously. The children first, the man last, his boots dragging on the wood floor in a way that made Zach think of someone who didn't belong but wanted to act like he did. Inside, the cool air from the shaded windows seemed to make the children shrink a little less under the heat. Still, Zach couldn't miss what the light revealed. Sam's cheeks were hollow. His shirt collar sagged on a frame that had long since grown past the fabric. Ellie's lips were cracked at the corners, and there was a faint tremble in her hands when she pushed a strand of hair from her face. Their eyes moved constantly, never resting on one thing for more than a heartbeat, like they were measuring the room for exits rather than comforts. Ellie spoke first, her voice soft but sure, calling the boy Sam. He answered with Ellie, and there was a quiet familiarity in it, a kind of loyalty forged under strain. That alone told Zach they'd been holding each other up for longer than any child should have to. Zach busied himself at the stove, more for the sake of thinking than cooking. He stirred the pot slowly, though he knew full well it was only half full and far from ready. He glanced at them out of the corner of his eye, the way Sam flinched when the man cleared his throat, the way Ellie took a half step in front of her brother, as though she could block trouble with her own shadow. "I'll check the stock," the man said suddenly, his voice too loud in the small room. The way he said it felt less like an errand and more like a warning. He swung the door open and stepped outside toward the corral, the sound of his spurs fading under the creak of the windmill outside. As soon as the door shut, Zach turned. His eyes went from Sam to Ellie, but his question was for her. His tone softened, but it carried the weight of a man who wouldn't turn away from the truth. "Where are your folks?" Ellie's gaze fell to the floor. She hesitated, her mouth tightening before any words came. "Dad!" She stopped, the sound catching. "They hurt him when he wouldn't pay for water." Her voice thinned on the last word. "Mom, they took her into town, said there was work, but she didn't come back." Zach felt a slow pressure in his chest, as if the air had thickened. Ellie kept her voice even, but the crack at the edge of it told the real story. "This man said he'd feed us," she added, her tone dipping into a bitter truth, "but he doesn't." It was as if the room itself remembered a time before, when Zach was no older than Sam and the summer sun had burned the land bare. The well had gone dry, his father gone with it, and his little sister had lain pale and silent in the shade while the neighbors passed by, their eyes sliding away. It wasn't the first time the world had shown him how it could choose cruelty over kindness. The door swung open again, cutting the memory short. The man stepped in with a chipped plate in hand, its surface bearing a thin, tired spread of beans. The smell was flat, sour at the edges. He set it down in front of the children without looking at them, as if even the act of offering food was an afterthought. Sam's eyes darted to the plate like a spark to dry grass. His fingers twitched toward it, the hunger plain on his face. But Ellie's hand found his forearm. Just a light touch, not forceful, not scolding. Sam froze, then drew his hand back slowly, his jaw tightening in silent agreement. They would not, even in their hunger, give this man the satisfaction of seeing them scramble. Zach stood in the corner, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair. He watched, saying nothing, but inside something solid and immovable was setting into place. That quiet act of resistance from two half-starved children told him more than words ever could. It wasn't just about food, it was about dignity. And that, Zach Harper knew, was worth defending. "Listen, friend," Zach said, lifting his hat slightly, his voice low but steady. "I could put you to work here. Fair pay, hot meals every day." The man's mouth twisted into a smirk. "These two?" He gave a short, dry laugh. "They're mine until I say otherwise." The words sat in the air like a brand pressed to skin, hot, unyielding. Zach didn't answer right away. He just studied the man for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly under the brim of his hat, before turning back toward the corral. By evening, the sun had dropped low enough to stretch the shadows long across the yard, painting the dust in deep gold and red. The wind had died down, leaving only the quiet groan of the barn's wooden beams. Zach walked to his stable, his steps slow but certain. Inside, the light was dim, filtered through narrow gaps in the planks. Against the far wall, on an old iron hook, hung his rifle. The stock was worn smooth from years of use, though dust had settled on it thick. He hadn't touched it in a long time. He'd made himself a promise years ago, never to take it down unless there was no other choice. Tonight he had a choice, but not the kind that left room for hesitation. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he wasn't about to let two children be kept like cattle. He lifted the rifle down carefully, testing the weight in his hands. The feel of it was both familiar and heavy with memory. This wasn't about pulling the trigger, it was about standing in a way the other man would understand. When the sky had darkened to a deep amber, Zach saddled his horse and rode the short distance to the neighboring ranch. The land between them was quiet, dotted with sagebrush and the occasional silhouette of a fence post leaning against the horizon. Cole was on his porch when Zach arrived, a broad-shouldered man with a face lined by sun and years, his chair creaking as he leaned back. He didn't need more than a look to know this wasn't a casual visit. Zach told him everything, short, plain sentences, no need for embellishment. Cole listened without interrupting, his eyes narrowing just slightly. Finally, he nodded once. "I'm with you, Zach," he said. "Not because I'm looking for trouble." He set his chair forward, the front legs hitting the porch boards with a thump. "But out here, if we don't stand for each other, we all fall alone." The last light of day caught on the barrel of Zach's rifle as he shifted it under his arm. Somewhere out past the ridge, a coyote called, its cry carrying long over the empty land. It sounded less like a warning and more like a promise of what was to come. Night had settled deep over the plains, the kind where the stars shone sharp and cold above the horizon. In the distance, the faint glow of a campfire flickered, its light bending and shrinking as the flames sank into embers. The wind had gone still, leaving only the crackle of the last burning wood and the occasional shift of a horse's hoof in the dirt. Zach and Cole moved through the darkness without a word, boots finding the softer patches of ground. Years of working the land had taught them how to be quieter than the night itself. Their shadows stretched long in the moonlight, gliding over sagebrush and dust. The man was there, just as they'd seen earlier, slumped against his saddle, hat tilted low, a faint rise and fall to his chest as he slept. The firelight carved his face in amber and shadow. Zach crouched beside the bedroll where Sam and Ellie lay, wrapped in thin blankets. He touched Ellie's shoulder gently. Her eyes opened in an instant, wary but alert. Sam stirred when she did. "Shh." Zach's voice was barely more than the wind. "Come with me." The children started to move, careful not to make a sound. But a shift in the fire's glow must have caught the man's eye even through sleep. He stirred, lifted his head, and in a heartbeat, his hand shot toward his belt. Before it could get there, Cole stepped forward from the shadows. His old rifle was in his hands, held low but ready, the kind of posture that carried decades of experience. "Leave them," Cole said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of something final. There was no challenge in it, only certainty. The man froze, eyes darting between the two ranchers. He saw what he needed to see. The steady aim in Cole's stance, the unblinking resolve in Zach's gaze. His mouth twisted into something between a curse and a snarl, but he let his hand fall away from his belt. He leaned back against the saddle, muttering under his breath, and turned his face toward the dying fire. Zach didn't relax. He knew men like this didn't give up easily. Tomorrow might bring trouble. But tonight, the children were leaving with him. They walked away quickly but without running, the sound of their steps swallowed by the vast silence of the plain. The moonlight lit the path to the ranch like a pale ribbon, and soon the house's shadow rose ahead of them. Inside, Zach set out bread, roasted meat, and a pot of beans still warm from earlier. Sam and Ellie ate slowly at first, as if unsure it was truly theirs to have, but before long the plates were empty. For the first time in a long while, their shoulders eased, and the lines of caution on their faces softened. That night, under a real roof, they slept without fear. Morning came soft over the prairie, the kind that made the edges of the world look gentle. The sun was still low, spilling pale gold light across the yard. From the kitchen drifted the smell of strong coffee and fresh bread, mingling with the faint sweetness of mesquite smoke from the stove. Ellie stood by the counter, sleeves rolled up, helping slice the bread. She moved with the quiet focus of someone who'd learned to keep her hands busy. Every now and then she glanced toward the window, watching her brother. Out in the yard, Sam was chasing a handful of stubborn hens, his laughter breaking across the morning like a clear bell. The chickens darted this way and that, their wings flapping, sending tiny clouds of dust into the sunlight. For once, his steps weren't cautious. They were quick and careless, the way a boy's should be. Zach sat on the porch, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, hat turning slowly in his hands. The wood beneath him was warm from the first touch of sunlight. He watched the yard in silence, the scene playing out like something he'd seen once in a dream but never thought he'd find again. Out here, a man had two choices: take or give. Zach had known men who took until there was nothing left to take, but he'd also seen how a single act of giving could ripple across miles of hard country. Sam, still flushed from the chase, bounded up the porch steps. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice carrying more weight than his years. "We'll work hard, we promise." Zach's eyes stayed on the horizon for a long moment before he answered. "This is your home now," he said, his voice low but certain. "And in a home, no one should have to fear going hungry." The boy's smile flickered for a second, as if testing whether the words were real, then settled into something steady. The wind shifted, carrying Zach's words toward the distant hills, where they would be lost to the open sky. But in his chest, he knew the truth. Sometimes it didn't take a whole town to change a life. Sometimes it took one person making one decision and standing by it. And on this warm, quiet morning, Zach Harper knew he had been that person.